It was one of those freezing winter days in Manhattan, the kind where the icy wind cuts through even the thickest of coats. Most people hurried by, too focused on their own warmth. But on this particular day, someone stopped. A man who rarely walked these streets without his entourage, Donald Trump. Instead of riding in the warmth of his motorcade, with tinted windows shielding him from the cold and the chaos of the city, Trump chose to walk. It was an unusual decision for a man of his stature, someone accustomed to the comfort and security of being driven. But something was different that day. Perhaps it was the quiet of the snow-covered streets, or maybe it was the stillness in the air, but he felt drawn to experience the city's rhythm firsthand, without the barrier of a vehicle separating him from the world outside. The crunch of snow under his feet, the cold biting at his skin. He could feel the pulse of the city, the way it moved, even in the harshest of conditions. As he walked, observing the hurried figures rushing past him, he noticed something unusual. A man, slumped against a brick wall, huddled in the cold, as if the world had moved on without him. Most passers-by didn't even glance his way, their minds unto consumed by their own worries. But Trump's eyes lingered. There, against the backdrop of the bustling city, was a figure wrapped in a worn, tattered military jacket. The fabric, once proud and strong, now hung loosely around the man's gaunt frame. It told a silent story of battles fought and sacrifices made. The faded insignia on the sleeve was the only clue to the man's past, a past that seemed so distant now, forgotten along with the man himself. The contrast was stark, the city's relentless forward march against this solitary figure left behind in time, a ghost of the person he once was. Trump's steps slowed as he neared the man, a rare hesitation overtaking his usually confident stride. It wasn't the typical scene that stopped him. He had passed by many in need before, like any New Yorker, moving too fast to stop. But today, something was different. His eyes, often focused on the future, the next deal, or the next task, softened with a rare emotion, one not easily associated with a man of his stature. It was more than just curiosity, it was a desire to understand. As he stood before the man slumped against the wall, Trump didn't see just another person struggling on the streets. He saw a story, one etched into the man's weathered face, written in the lines of hardship and resilience. He didn't rush to judge or offer charity as a quick fix. Instead, he took a breath, his gaze locking onto the man's eyes, which had seen more than most could imagine. Without fanfare or speeches, Trump extended his hand, the simple gesture cutting through the cold air with an unexpected warmth. His voice, usually commanding and sure, softened as he asked the most basic of questions. "What's your name?" For a moment, the man didn't move. His eyes, dull from exhaustion and the weight of life on the streets, blinked up at Trump in surprise. No one had asked him his name in a long time, not like this, not with sincerity. Slowly, his cracked lips parted, and a single word escaped, carried on a single word of disappointment and doubt, lack of sleep, lack of approval, despair, differences, rough strained by the cold, and years of being unheard. But there was still strength in it, a quiet dignity that had survived despite everything. In that brief exchange, something shifted, an invisible barrier that separated them melted away, if only for a moment. Two men from vastly different worlds stood on equal ground. It wasn't about wealth or power, success or failure. It was simply one human recognizing another, bound by a shared moment of empathy. That connection, fragile yet profound, was formed in an instant, a bond of shared humanity. The connection breathed its loyalty. Jack Miller was once a proud soldier, a member of Bravo Company, a brotherhood forged in the heat of battle. He had worn his uniform with honor, carrying the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, fighting not just for himself, but for his country and his comrades. There were moments of fear, moments of courage, and moments of loss. Yet through it all, he had stood tall, believing that his sacrifice was for a greater good. But when Jack returned home, the war he had left behind was replaced by another, one he had never been prepared for. The battles weren't fought with weapons or tactics, but with something far more insidious: silence. There were no parades, no celebrations waiting for him. Instead, he was greeted by indifference. The skills that had once made him a leader in the field seemed meaningless in the civilian world. Doors to jobs that should have been open remained shut. He searched for work, for a way to start over, but opportunity was always out of reach. The system that was supposed to help him, the same one he had fought for, seemed to have forgotten him. Support was scarce, and the promises made to returning soldiers felt hollow. The sense of purpose he once had was slowly eroded by the grind of daily survival. And so, like many of his fellow veterans, Jack found himself on the streets, no home, no safety net, and no way out. Yet, when Jack spoke to Trump that day, he wasn't asking for pity. He didn't want charity or a quick fix. He simply wanted to be heard. In the cold, with snow falling around him, Jack shared his story, not as a plea for help, but as an acknowledgement of the reality faced by so many veterans. He spoke of the pride he once held, the challenges he had overcome in battle, and the unexpected struggle of coming home to a country that seemed to have moved on without him. His voice was steady, even as he recounted the hardest moments. There was no bitterness, just a quiet dignity, as he described how his life had unraveled, piece by piece. In that moment, all he needed was for someone to listen, to understand that the fight wasn't just overseas, it was here, in the very streets he had once defended. This wasn't just an act of charity for Trump. It wasn't about handing over a few bills or offering temporary relief from the cold. No, something much deeper stirred within him that day. Trump didn't see Jack as just another man down on his luck. He saw a veteran, someone who had once served with pride and courage, someone who had been let down by a system that should have supported him. It wasn't enough to simply pull Jack off the streets. Trump knew that the real solution required more than a handout. It required recognition, respect, and a commitment to change. That day, as he walked away from Jack, Trump's mind raced. He couldn't shake the image of Jack in his worn military jacket, a symbol of service, now crumpled in the snow, forgotten. This was a man who had given so much and yet had been left with nothing. Trump made a decision, a personal vow. Jack, and others like him, deserved more than just a fleeting moment of kindness. They deserved to be seen, to be acknowledged for their sacrifices. True to his word, Trump didn't stop at a single gesture. Days later, Jack found himself in a place he never expected to be: the White House. The same streets that had swallowed him in anonymity were now far behind. He wasn't just another invisible face in the crowd anymore. Now he was standing in the halls of power, a guest of honor. The transformation was astonishing. Jack, once slumped against a brick wall in the freezing cold, was now walking through the corridors of history, surrounded by opulence and grandeur. The man who had once been ignored by society was now at the heart of it, in a place where decisions were made that could change lives, including his own. Trump hadn't just offered Jack a momentary escape from the streets. He had offered him a seat at the table, a place where his story would be heard by those with the power to make a difference. Jack was no longer just a man struggling to survive. He was now a symbol, a reminder that the fight for veterans didn't end when the war was over. In those halls, Jack stood not only for himself, but for every forgotten veteran, his presence a quiet but powerful statement. Their service mattered, and so did they. In a ceremony that honored not just Jack, but the sacrifices of his entire unit, Trump stood by his side, a figure of solidarity and respect. This was not a moment of political grandstanding or simple charity. It was a recognition of the deep, untold stories of men like Jack, who had once stood shoulder to shoulder on the battlefield, fighting not for recognition, but for each other. Bravo Company, a unit that had once been at the heart of some of the toughest conflicts, had long been forgotten by the public, lost in the endless march of time and the fading memories of war. But today, in the grandeur of the White House, Bravo Company was brought back into the light. The room was filled with a quiet reverence as veterans of Jack's unit gathered together, men who had faced the same struggles and carried the same burdens. The sense of brotherhood that had sustained them through war was palpable once again. For many of them, this moment felt like a long overdue acknowledgement of the bravery and sacrifice they had given, not just on the battlefield, but in the fight for survival after returning home. As Trump spoke, his words carried weight, not just for the audience, but for the veterans who had felt forgotten. Bravo Company, once left in the shadows of history, was now being remembered for their unwavering courage, their endurance in the face of overwhelming odds. Their stories, once buried beneath layers of neglect, were now told with pride and honor. They were no longer just names in old military records, but living symbols of the resilience that defined them. For Jack, this moment was transformative. The man who had once been invisible on the streets, who had sat unnoticed in the cold with a weathered military jacket, was now standing tall as a beacon of hope and strength. He wasn't just a homeless veteran anymore. He had become a symbol, not just for his comrades in Bravo Company, but for thousands of veterans across the country who had faced similar struggles. Jack's journey, from the cold streets of Manhattan to the hallowed halls of the White House, was a testament to the power of resilience, of never giving up even when the world seemed to have forgotten you. As he stood there, receiving the honor alongside his fellow veterans, Jack realized that he was no longer just one man fighting to survive. He was part of something much bigger. His story and the stories of Bravo Company were now woven into the fabric of a national narrative, a reminder that the sacrifices of those who serve must never be forgotten. Trump's promise didn't end with Jack. That moment of compassion on a cold Manhattan street had ignited something far greater than a one-time gesture. It had planted the seed for lasting change. Trump knew that Jack's story wasn't unique. It was the story of countless veterans who had returned from battle only to find themselves forgotten, left to struggle on their own. And that, he realized, was a failure that needed to be addressed at a much larger scale. Driven by this realization, Trump launched a new initiative, one that would go beyond simply helping Jack, one that would honor the legacy of Bravo Company and all the men and women who had served their country but found themselves abandoned upon their return. He created a special fund named in honor of Bravo Company, with a clear and unwavering mission. No veteran would ever feel alone or unsupported again. This wasn't just about offering temporary relief. The fund was designed to provide meaningful, long-term solutions, helping veterans find stable housing, access mental health services, and secure jobs that would allow them to rebuild their lives with dignity. Trump understood that it wasn't enough to offer a bed for the night or a meal for the day. These veterans needed the tools to reclaim their futures, to move forward with purpose and pride. The announcement of the fund was met with widespread support. Across the country, veterans who had once felt invisible began to see a glimmer of hope. The ripples of kindness that had started on that cold Manhattan street now stretched far and wide, reaching thousands of veterans in need. For many, it was the first time they had felt truly seen, the first time they believed that their sacrifices had not been in vain. Programs began springing up under the fund's banner: job training for veterans transitioning into civilian life, counseling services for those struggling with PTSD, housing initiatives that provided safe, permanent homes for those who had spent years on the streets. The fund didn't just provide financial support, it created a network of care, connecting veterans to the resources and community they needed to thrive. For Jack, this change was personal. As he watched the fund take shape and grow, he realized that his story had become a beacon of hope for others like him. His journey from the streets to the White House had sparked something much larger, something that would continue long after that single act of kindness. Veterans across the nation, many of whom had felt abandoned and lost, now had a path forward, a way to rebuild their lives. Trump's promise to Jack, to Bravo Company, and to all veterans wasn't just words. It was a commitment to ensuring that the men and women who had given so much would never again feel as though they had been left behind. The fund stood as a testament to that promise, a living reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. It offered not just new beginnings, but a recognition of the dignity and strength that every veteran carries, no matter how invisible they may have once felt. This story serves as a powerful reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can create waves of change, far beyond what we can imagine. It shows us that no matter how vast the world may seem, and no matter how invisible someone might feel, a single moment of recognition can spark a transformation. A handshake, a conversation, a simple gesture of empathy. It may seem insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but in the right moment, it can turn a life around. Jack's journey from a forgotten veteran on the streets to a symbol of resilience and hope began with one act of kindness. Trump could have walked by that day just like everyone else, but instead, he chose to stop. He chose to see Jack, not just as a homeless man, but as a person with a story, with value, and with potential. That small act of recognition, that brief human connection, set off a chain of events that would not only change Jack's life, but ripple outward to help thousands of other veterans who would face the same struggles. So, what do you think? Can simple acts of kindness truly heal the deepest wounds? Can a single moment of empathy make a lasting difference in someone's life? I believe it can. The smallest gesture, when given with genuine care, can lift someone out of darkness and offer them a path to healing and hope. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories and ideas about how kindness can create change. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of wisdom, inspiration, and the power of compassion. Together, we can explore how even the simplest actions can spark something extraordinary in the lives of others. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more inspiring tales from William's Wisdom Stories, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Join me on this journey, and let's discover how small acts of kindness can make a big difference.